currently doing. It seems like they distance very much the spiritual aspect to their service. Recently, the Eva's Eden group has gone basically silent, and I tried to look up the website, but it's still down. They were contacted for an interview sometime around August, and Cheryl's daughter-in-law and shelter manager, Nicole Walker, sent an email back stating that she would need to contact the FBI, local sheriff, and their attorney before granting the interview, and said that she would get right back with them on whether they would be able to do the interview. And the next day, their website was gone, their Facebook page was gone, and they were basically off the grid. So according to Cheryl's mother, who has made a statement since then, Cheryl's no longer a pastor, the church no longer exists, and according to former members, that is not true. So they say that it's very much in existence, that they are still going. There are apparently about 30 to 40 people that are still a part of this group today, and that they maintain that it's still up and running. So those are still two very, very different theories on what's happening even today. Now, an update on the former members that I spoke of during this show, just to let you know where they are today. Michelle is very, very remorseful for everything that happened with her daughter. It seems like they've had a strained relationship, obviously, but that they've somewhat worked things out. And she's very, very happy to be out of the group, very, very happy to have much better life now that she's out of the group, and very relieved. Rachel was kicked out of the group shortly before their move was scheduled for Tennessee. The funny thing about this is that she was eventually allowed to move to Tennessee and help with the group, and she was commanded to keep tithing, but she was no longer fully allowed to be a member. And so she did that for a while until she actually left the group. Mary also eventually left the group. Mary met a woman and she fell in love. According to Cheryl's teachings, homosexuality was absolutely not allowed. It was an abomination and it was not okay. And when Mary talked to Cheryl about this, or Cheryl found out, I'm not sure how that happened, but Cheryl offered to tell the group for Mary that homosexuality was okay now, that she had had a prophecy, she had had some sort of a revelation, and that homosexuality is suddenly approved. Mary gladly declined the offer, and I'm so glad she did. She decided not to stay in this group. She is finding a new life, and she's still with this woman that she fell in love with, and she's very, very happy as well. So, of course, there are some long-lasting effects from any cult, any group like this that's been controlling you for 10 years of your life. I am not in any way intending to say that their life is perfect, but I'm so happy to see that all of those three people have moved on to bigger and better and happier things now. So I'm very happy to report that part. I have a poll, so if you're listening on Spotify, go on there. Let me know what you think. Is this still a thing? Is this cult still going? And if you're listening on Spotify, I would ask you to go check that poll out, answer yes or no to that. As always, get back with me, sinisterstoryhour@gmail.com. Let me know what you think about this story. I think it's wild. The whole cat lady / cult leader thing, super weird combination, but it seems like Miss Cheryl was just a super weird combination of all kinds of things anyway. Tonight, before we go, I have a story of domestic violence again. This time I have a happy story. It's a domestic violence survivor, and I don't know how happy it is, but it does have a slightly happier ending than the other ones that I've been reading lately. So I'm not going to read the entire story, but just pieces of it. I'm not paraphrasing or anything. I'm taking it directly from the article, but I'm only reading pieces of it. So I'm also going to post this site in my show notes, so please take a look at that site. There were a lot of stories on there that were just very interesting, and I really, I love listening to different stories of the things that people have been through, the empowering things, the things that, even the horrible things that we can learn from. I mean, it's never in vain, right? So tonight's domestic violence story is about Gus Brock. Gus doesn't embody what society paints as a typical survivor. He's a gruff 62-year-old long-haul truck driver. He's bald, broad-shouldered, and looks like he could have been a bouncer if he needed a side gig. But look closer, and you'll see that Gus has a purple ribbon tattoo on the inside of his right arm, with the letters BTS inside. Break the silence. He also has a Break the Silence sticker in the window of his truck. When people ask, I tell them my story, says Gus, referring to the abuse he endured growing up and his subsequent 6-year marriage to an abusive wife. Most of the time they're interested and want to hear what I have to say. He says he hates the term manly. What is manly? I tell people I'm a feminist. Gus grew up experiencing extreme emotional abuse and neglect from his mother. I think she disliked my father because he was not a strong man and she was able to manipulate him a lot, tells Gus. He describes himself as nonviolent and non-aggressive, a fact that his mother disliked as well. As soon as possible, Gus wanted to escape his tumultuous home life. He married at 18. She was his first girlfriend, his first kiss, and the first woman in his life who had shown him any kindness aside from his grandmother. But she too had come from an abusive home, witnessing her father abuse her mother. Gus's mother told him she must be pretty trashy and desperate to settle for a guy like her son. His wife's abuse had begun before they'd ever even said their vows. The first time she hit Gus was at a state fair when they were 17. He tried to win her a stuffed toy at a game booth, but she wasn't pleased with the small teddy bear. When I tried to give it to her, she said I hadn't tried hard enough and that I was paying too much attention to the girl running the booth. She threw the bear into the trash can and slapped me hard across the face, remembers Gus. Still, Gus says he never connected his wife's behavior with his mother's. To be perfectly honest, I was just so excited to have a female pay attention to me that I wasn't going to do anything to jeopardize that. With each abusive incident, Gus said his only thought was that he wanted to make up for whatever it was he did to cause it. Gus joined the Navy after high school, but his new wife was unhappy with military life. She referred to Gus as worthless. She became extremely suspicious of him, showing up at work without notice to check up on him and screaming at him when he got home, accusing him of sleeping with other women. She would slap him, scratch his arms, or punch him in the stomach if Gus didn't do what she asked quickly enough. I would numbly submit to it and tell her I wasn't cheating. I only loved her, and I was so sorry she was unhappy, says Gus. Eventually, she would calm down and tell me that if she ever found out I was cheating, she would kill me. At one point, his wife said she was leaving him. She had a boyfriend, was going to move in with him. She demanded a divorce. He moved away to another state to continue his military training, both dumbstruck and depressed. Eventually, she called and said that she had broken up with her boyfriend and demanded he take her back. Gus did. I rationalized now that she would know I was a good guy and our marriage would be better, but the abuse started immediately. Gus says over the next year and a half, his military medical records would reflect the abuse, or rather, his attempts to hide the abuse. The scratches on his arms and face were from falling into bushes. His concussion came from falling against a wall. At one point, Gus tried to take an assignment to Norway to get away from his abuser. She beat him so severely with a pool cue that she broke 2 of his ribs, gave him a concussion, and broke his right tibia. He told emergency room staff he fell down a flight of stairs. As a result, he missed out on the assignment. Each time she beat me, she would use a different weapon. Flower vases, shoes, frying pans, cooking utensils, and sometimes just her fists, says Gus. Sometimes I would try holding her wrists to keep her from hitting me, and I would leave bruises where I held them. She threatened to call the military police and show them the bruises as proof that I was abusing her. During one incident in the car, military police saw her beating Gus and pulled them over. They didn't arrest her. Instead, says Gus, one of them walked up to him and told him, "Grow some balls and slap the bitch around a bit, and maybe she won't hit you." Gus said that even though he was far more physically strong than his abuser, he could never justify retaliating with violence. Hitting her for any reason would have made me an abuser. I talked to my chaplain. He said to beat her back. My naval advisor gave me similar advice, says Gus. I've never struck any woman ever for any reason. Instead, Gus wondered what he could do to be better. His abuser told him that if he was a better man, a stronger man, she wouldn't hit him. I thought it was some defect in myself, says Gus. The only time there was peace in the relationship was when his wife became pregnant. The beating stopped, and Gus believes in order to protect her pregnancy. After his daughter was born, the abuse began again. After one particularly harrowing beating, his abuser threw him out and demanded a divorce. Afraid of losing touch with his daughter, Gus says he went along with whatever she wanted. The luckiest day of his life, he says, is when his wife demanded he get psychiatric help. His therapist told him he wasn't crazy. He was a victim of domestic violence. A survivor herself, his therapist helped Gus come to the realization that he didn't deserve abuse. No one did. Through therapy, Gus began to feel empowered, and when his abuser, now ex-wife, demanded they get back together, Gus refused. Even though Gus escaped with his life, he lost something else in the process: his daughter. Gus's abuser accused Gus of sexually molesting their child in order to keep him from her. It got to the point where I would have had to put her on the witness stand at the age of 5. It was a choice of putting her through that or backing away. I decided to back away in hopes that she, his abuser, would realize that she needs her father. Unfortunately, he would come to find out decades later, after Gus left them alone, that his abuser turned the focus of her abuse toward their daughter. That was the hardest part of it all. I could never forgive my ex for that, he says. 25 years later, Gus and his daughter, a social worker, finally reconnected. He says the two have had a wonderful relationship now. One thing that stood out to me about this experience is that Gus is just barely beginning to speak out about this experience. This happened in the mid-70s, and he is just barely beginning to speak out about this within the last 4 to 5 years. The other thing that just brings me so much sadness was the fact that he was told to beat her back, that it could be so much easier. Why don't you just hit her back and she'll stop it? We have to do better. And abuse with anyone in any domestic violence situation is not okay. And if you are one of those people that is suffering something like this, or going through an experience, or knows somebody who is, please reach out and learn from these experiences. Luckily, Gus got out. His daughter and him do have a relationship today. It's not always the case. And so we hear those stories of the worst case scenarios. And tonight I wanted to leave you kind of a positive story of a best case scenario out of one of these horrible situations. So this was on domesticshelters.org. I would encourage you to go on there and read all of the stories that are on there and to see. We'll continue to look at different stories from there about true survivor stories. So thank you all. I will leave some resources in my show notes as well for anybody who is struggling with a situation with domestic violence. I urge you to do something about it. Do whatever you can to stay safe. And I wish you all so much love, and thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, bye. Thank you for listening, everybody. We will see you next time on Sinister Story Hour.